Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Junichi Stephen Sato, who is a pianist and a composer. He studied piano with Vladimir Lechkis and Dmitry Papiano, and he has won numerous awards at national and international competitions. In 1995, he founded J.S. Sato Music Editions, a music publishing business that has been gaining worldwide reputation as a publisher of unique editions. His publications have been highly praised in journals and magazines such as Clavier, Piano and Keyboard, and 20th Century Music. His works are performed internationally and also at Ravinia Festival and on National Public Radio. Junichi adjudicates frequently at many piano competitions, chaired ISMTA's composition competition from 2005 to 2007, and CAMTA's Roberto Safla piano contest from 2003 to 2012. He has been CAMTA's webmaster since 2019, putting his knowledge and experience as a computer programming hobbyist to good use. In addition to teaching at Sato Music Studios LLC, Junichi is currently on the faculty at DePaul University. Today he will hold the Tech Talk and will share with us how to use MuseScore. Please welcome with me Junichi Sato.
Okay, am I on?
Yes. Let me get
Right, so welcome everyone to this presentation about MuseScore. And I'm just coming off of having had laryngitis for a while, so my voice isn't completely back yet. So hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully my voice will last for the hour. But we do have a lot to show you. So for now, I would ask that if you have any questions that pop up, to please type them in chat, and I will try to best to address them as I'm able. I will check the question and answers or questions in chat in between musical examples and that kind of thing. Okay, so first and foremost, what is MuseScore? MuseScore is a free open source software that does music engraving. And music engraving is otherwise known as music notation software, music typesetting, note setting, etc. It's a lot of little epithets, if you will. Now, there's a question that seems to inevitably come up whenever we talk about music notation software, and it kind of drives me nuts a little bit. The question is, can you compose music directly on it? I know people do. I don't. It's just that when you type music into a software to get it published and make it look nice and so on and so forth, usually there's a very specific workflow. And I don't compose the way the workflow works in engraving software, so I just find it too distracting to do that. However, if it works for you, all the more power to you. So make sure that my screen share works here. So I just wanted to point out a couple things about what open source software is, because you may be wondering about that. Open source software is where the source code for the program is publicly available. So anybody can download it, anybody can make changes to it. If you're a programmer, you can customize the software to your own liking. I'm not that proficient in programming, so I wouldn't do that. But in any case, there's a community of volunteer programmers who are enthusiasts who come together and continuously update the software. They add new features and so on and so forth. Now, you may be wondering about, is it safe to use? How much does it really cost and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of little considerations that you want to think about when you're choosing between commercial software that you pay for versus open source software, which is often free. And it's a little tricky because it used to be pros and cons, but the line between the good and bad become kind of blurred. So we're at a point where the differences are more it's just different, and it's not necessarily so that one is better than the other. Is my microphone making noise? I don't think it's my microphone. I hear a little noise. Okay. So obviously, probably the consideration at the top of the list for most people is the cost. So commercial software costs money. Uh, Open source software is initially free. There's no direct costs, and there may be indirect costs, like if you're a company using open source software, you may have to retrain your staff and that kind of stuff. Uh, we used to think that commercial software had more features sooner, and then open source software was always lagging behind. But again, it kind of depends on the community of programmers who uh, implement features and so on and so forth. So they kind of work based on what people are asking for. Adoption, uh, if you ask for a document, like a typed document, it's very likely you'll get a Word document. So it's very widely adopted. So not very many people in comparison use LibreOffice Writer. And so obviously, these days you can open a lot of different formats in any software, but this used to be an issue. Support, again, commercial used to support their software through paid staff. And so they had a dedicated support staff. But these days, more and more, they're relying more and more on the community to provide support. And so this is very similar to open source software. Security, um, we used to think commercial was more secure than open source software, which is out in the open. But even open source software, the programmers usually go through steps to get their work published. And so, uh, once again, this is an area where you can't ask which one is better. It's more just that they're just different. Okay, which one's more reliable? Again, it kind of depends on your team and so on. So usability, longevity. Um, Commercial software, if the company goes bankrupt, poof, you can't use the software anymore. Uh, Open source software depends on the enthusiasm of the people involved, and sometimes people criticize the programmers, and of course they get discouraged and eventually quit. And so from that standpoint, again, it's just different. It's not like one is better than the other. Okay, so that's just some features or considerations when we're picking between commercial and open source software. So just to give you some examples, and this might come in useful for those who need to focus on the business aspect of running a studio, or maybe they're doing graphic designs and so on and so forth. So I just thought I'd list some of the more popular open source alternatives of popular commercial software. So for word processing, everybody uses Microsoft Word. On the open source side, there's Apache OpenOffice. There's also a spin-off of Apache called LibreOffice, and they kept the same name for the word processing software. They're both called Writer, but they're different versions of Writer. But in any case, either of those are open source, so you can download these and use them for free. Excel, of course, is a very popular piece of software. The Apache and LibreOffice equivalent is something called Calc. And again, if you're just doing basic spreadsheet stuff, that's usually very sufficient. If you're into complex database management, you might be using Access. Again, on the Apache or LibreOffice side, you have something called Base. So these are all free software on the right-hand side. You might also wonder about Google Docs and Google Sheets, which are free to use for anybody with a Google account, but they're not considered open source because they don't publish their source code publicly. So that's a little different. Okay, so graphic design, Illustrator, some people like to use that. There's an open source equivalent called Inkscape. Photoshop, very popular photo editing software. I've recently used GIMP in place of Photoshop. works just as well. Again, it's a little different, but works for what I need. And in the video editing arena, Premiere Pro is like the de facto video editing software that a lot of people use. There are others, of course, but there's an open source alternative which is called Shotcut. So those are some options. And finally, we get to the last three here, which are probably more interesting to us as musicians. So if you ever need to do audio recording and editing, um, believe it or not, SoundForge used to be the big thing. And I did a CAMTA technology presentation on this 18 years ago, back in 2004. So maybe some of the old-time CAMTA members remember this, but anyhow, SoundForge is what we used to use a lot. These days you have one by Adobe called Audition, a very equivalent software, and of course we have an open source alternative called Audacity. MIDI sequencing, if you're composing digital music and stuff like that, might come in useful. Digital Performer by a company called Motu. They produce a lot of equipment for music. So it's a very well-known company. But there's a sequencing software that's free called Aria Maestosa. And now we come to the software that we're talking about today, MuseScore, which does music notation. And in the commercial area, there are three major pieces of software that people use. They are Finale, which has been around forever. I think it's $299 for the full retail version. There's also a academic and theological version, which goes for $99. Okay. Sibelius, which has been around for a while, and it's been on and off because at one point Avid decided to kind of let go of the development team, and then recently they restarted Sibelius. So Sibelius is actually on a subscription plan, and a lot of commercial products are starting to go this route, which is instead of paying once to own a license to use the software, it would be kind of a renewal license. So every year you would pay $159 for the full version, what they call the ultimate version of Sibelius. And there's a student teacher license, which goes for $99 a year. And finally, a relative newcomer to the arena, Dorico. And I believe a lot of the developers of the original Sibelius, when they were let go by Avid, they came together with somebody named Steinberg to develop Dorico. Anyway, this one is $579.99 for the Pro version. Now, all these software, I don't know much about them because I don't personally use them. I use something called MuseScore, and unfortunately, the developer of MuseScore passed away back in 2013. His name was Leland Smith. He's a professor emeritus at Stanford University. He also has a little bit of Chicago connections because he taught at the University of Chicago for a number of years. In any case, he was known for MuseScore, and people liked it because the output is absolutely gorgeous. And I like the software because it's extremely flexible. There's literally nothing you can't do in the software. I've done, just to give you some examples, I've done phone charts, I've done floor plan layouts in Score, I've done, believe it or not, electrical diagrams in Score. So it's a very flexible program, and I like it for that reason. Unfortunately, his family, after he passed away, we kind of talked to them to try to encourage them to sell the software to some company or at least make it open source or something. But we haven't really heard from them, so I'm afraid it's dead in the water. So part of my interest in MuseScore is I'm kind of looking around for some alternatives. And so I've been using MuseScore for the last month just to try it out. And so, as with any publisher who publishes stuff, I try to look for ways to kind of push the limits to the extreme. So you'll see some examples where we try to do that today. And anyway, what's kind of interesting is after Leland Smith passed away, who produced WinScore, several people got together and produced this music symbols font called Leland, which is based on this WinScore system, and it's actually one of the fonts that's used in MuseScore. So I was kind of looking at this at first and thought, wow, that looks a little bit like Score. And so that's the reason why it's been adopted. So anyway, MuseScore is the open source alternative, and it can be downloaded from a website, musescore.org. So let me show you that real quick. Okay, so once you're get to musescore.org, you're presented with this page right away, free download. You can click on that and it'll take you from there. So it'll automatically detect your system, should be available for Windows as well as Mac and Linux. Now, you can also download MuseScore without MuseHub. MuseScore version 4 is the current version. It's relatively recent. I think it was released sometime in mid-December, right before I started using MuseScore. So at that point, MuseHub, which is this little thing in the corner that you get where you can download things like MuseScore. Also, Audacity is part of that package. And then you can also get extra sounds that sound fonts that sound better in MuseScore. But that's kind of like a work in progress. So you really, in my opinion, you don't really need it at this point. You can always get it later. So if you're just looking for a notation program, then you might want to just download MuseScore without the MuseHub. But that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're discussing today, so we'll not talk about that. Okay, so let's move on. And first of all, before we continue on, just a quick disclaimer. I am not involved personally with the development of MuseScore. I'm not here to endorse it nor criticize it. So I'm just here to show you what it does and what it can't do. So I recommend you try it out if you're looking for such a program. And why not? It's a full program and it's free. And it's the best way to learn MuseScore is to try to engrave a few things yourself and start with some really easy examples so you get a hang for it. Along these lines, I'm going to show you today the general process that's involved, not just the process of inputting notes, but the overall process of thinking that's involved in trying to make an engraving program work to your advantage, particularly if you have unique situations. And you probably won't walk out of this presentation remembering all the keystrokes and stuff like that. Instead, I'll discuss the capabilities as well as the limitations of MuseScore with the hope that you can see if the software is suitable for your particular situation. You may have student composers. Is the software sufficient and intuitive for them to use? Maybe you're a music teacher who's looking for a suitable tool to typeset examples and stuff like that. Perhaps you're a music director and you need to throw together printed parts really, really quickly. Or maybe you're a composer or arranger and you're looking to prepare your works for publication and wondering if MuseScore lives up to your needs. Excuse me. I did mention flexibility when it comes to WinScore. So there's a trade-off between flexibility and automation. MuseScore attempts to do more of the automation, as you will see. When there's more flexibility, there's more of a learning curve, but that's just the nature of the thing. Now, automation doesn't mean that it fixes all of your mistakes. So just because you can read music and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can notate it well. So a good test to find out whether you're good at it is to place take something you play from memory and write it down on a staff, and then compare what you wrote down to the printed music itself, and you might be rather surprised. So to be able to use any music notation program effectively, it'll help to first and foremost have a solid knowledge of music theory, how to spell diminished chords, and that kind of thing. Let me show you a funny example. Um, so here, one day a student of mine brought in a piece that they printed out from the internet. And it was an arrangement of a piece. I don't remember what it was, but I remember the first chord distinctly. It looked like this. So I sat down at the piano and I said, okay, let's check it out. And then I did a double take and I said, wait a minute, that's not C sharp, that's D sharp. Basically, it's an E minor chord or a C minor chord, and it's spelled out this way. So, I played it wrong because of the way it was spelled out. So obviously, this should be an E flat. Let's say you have this might be pretty typical in pop music. This rhythm. And so on. But you see, it's notated funny. So when I see this in 4/4, I might assume that these are triplets. So the best thing to do here, obviously, is to take this note and to convert that into an eighth note, and then to tie that into what the next part. So it's very important that the halfway point of 4/4 is very clear. And the same thing goes in 6/8, which is supposed to be 2 beats per measure, 2 beats of dotted quarter note rhythms. And if I see this, this looks like 3/4. And so again, similar situation where you want that beat to be tied over to another eighth note. Okay, so these are some of the problems that might come up. It'll also help you to know um, the basic rules of notation. And I was a music major for 9 years and never was this covered. There are books about music notation, but they can only cover so much. And so that leads us to the next one, which is be willing to learn the rules that you are not familiar with. So there's situations where you don't know what to do. At times, I've sat through a music library, perusing through hundreds of examples just to see how things were done. And so you have to be willing to learn the way of doing things. And finally, keep in mind that music typesetting is actually an art form. So there's not going to be any one particular way that things should be done at the end of the day. Okay, so since I have MuseScore open here, let me just introduce you very quickly to some of the um, things that you see. So first we have our standard menu items at the top, and that's should be no surprise. But to tell you the truth, you rarely use these menu items, rarely. Most of the work you do is in this tab called Score. Okay, so you'll be in this tab most of the time, and then you'll be um, using that. There's also a Home tab where you can open new score or a score that you've done before. And then the Publish tab is where you can take it's basically what it's going to look like in print. Okay, so here you can see there are some dotted lines that show you where the title area goes and that kind of thing. These will not print, so you wanted to kind of take a look at what the finished product is going to look like. You go to Publish. From here, you can export your music to PDFs and graphic files and XMLs and all sorts of stuff, or even MIDI files. So it's actually pretty good at playing or rendering the music that you input. So this is kind of one of the nice things about MuseScore. You can also my box back here. You can also extract parts for playback. You have a mixer which can control the volume levels and that kind of thing. And speaking of the playback, these are controls that allow you to do some playback in your music. All right, then we come down to the part where you will be spending most time on, which is the main um, music score. Okay, so we'll be doing a lot of mouse clicking in that area. We have something called palettes, from where you would take musical elements and you click on those or drag them onto the music to, for example, let's say I want to change the time signature here. Go under the time signature palette group, and then say I wanted to change the 6/8 to a 3/4. I can click and drag, and it'll automatically change that time signature for me. Okay, the next group is called instruments. So that's where you can add instruments into your score or make modifications to your instrument and that kind of thing. Obviously, this is just a piano score, so that's the only instrument that you have. And then finally, you have the properties tab here, where most of the changes that you make in what you already have in the score can be made from here. Yeah, so that's kind of what you're seeing on the screen at the bottom. Down here, you can change page views to something called continuous view, which is interesting. So if I do well, then this is not a good example for this. Let me open a different thing. Here, silly musette. If I do page view into continuous view, then you get this one long strip of paper where the music is continuous. So this might be interesting in things like playback. Obviously, you don't want to publish a score like this. You can also keep it continuous vertically so that you don't have to deal with page turns. Again, it's kind of nice if you're trying not to get distracted by all the layout issues and that kind of thing. Okay. All right, so let's go along here and demonstrate for you I'm going to input a very famous piece. I need to find it first, so give me 1 second. All right, so recognize this, I hope, if you're a pianist. This is the Clementi Sonatina. It's from the first edition, believe it or not, so it's kind of got a couple peculiarities. First of all, we have these guys, which are, it looks like an inverted eighth rest or a mirrored eighth rest, and these are actually quarter rests. So this is pretty common way of writing quarter rests during this time. Also, you may look at these fingerings and wonder, like, what the heck's going on here? It's like 1 3 1 plus plus. Here's a funny one: 4 3 2 1 plus 1 2. What's going on? And in the old times, this is thankfully no longer happens, but this is kind of an English version of doing fingerings. And so it's kind of like string fingerings where your finger number 2 right now is actually your finger number 1. So the thumb isn't counted as a finger. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and the pluses are thumbs. So it's a little weird when you're looking at this because you got to kind of shift the numbers down over one just to kind of figure out what they meant by this. I'm not going to deal with these fingerings, but I just wanted to show you how to engrave this. So let's see here. Okay, I'm going to share the sound so you can hear what MuseScore actually does. So it's hoping to keep the music open while I do this, but apparently I can't do this. So apparently there's a new version. Okay, so what I want to do is to choose what instrument I'm writing for. So piano is under the keyboards category, and then I had piano. And notice in this right-hand box, the list of instruments would show up. And so we have piano. I hit next. key signature is C major. There's no need to change this, but you have all these different key signatures you can use. Time signature in this edition is cut time, so I can go ahead and change that. Then we can set a tempo if we want. You don't have to, but for playback purposes, it just might make sense to have it. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick that in there. I'm not sure what tempo, maybe something like 80. Okay, and then you can also set the number of measures you plan to work with. Now, this can always be added onto or taken away, so I don't really worry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and click Done, and that will open up a score that's totally blank. Okay, so what's important to note here is when you do note input, basically you're using this strip up here where you're going to select notes and stuff like that. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is to be in note input in order to input notes. So I click where I want to put notes in. Notice that the rest turns blue. I click this icon, or I can just click N to get that set up. And then the workflow here in MuseScore is you got to choose the rhythm first and then put the note in. So if you do it some other way, you have to go back and fix things, and it becomes a little bit of a pain. So here, notice that the quarter note is chosen for you. So I'm going to go ahead and type a C on the keyboard, and that will put a C in. Now, if it's the wrong octave, then you can do Control plus down arrow or up arrow to shift that note up or down an octave. So that's a pretty quick way to change the note. And you can also use the arrow key without the control key, and you'll go through all the notes chromatically like this. There's also Control plus Shift plus arrow key. Okay, never mind that. I think it's, I've only been using this for a month, so Shift plus Alt plus arrow, I think. Yeah, that moves your note diatonically, so you don't have to go through all the chromatic steps. Okay, my next rhythm is eighth, so I need to change over to the eighth note. You can also use if I hover my mouse over these rhythms, you'll notice that there are these numbers in parentheses. Those are shortcut keys. So it says quarter note 5. If I want a quarter note, I can also tap 5 on my keyboard. I don't find that totally intuitive because, quarter note 5, it just doesn't make much sense to me. But another thing you can do to cycle through these is to use the Q and W keys. So if I use Q, it'll move to the left. And if I use W, it'll move to the right. So I use that quite often because I find that more intuitive than typing a 5 or a 4 for specific notes. Okay, anyway, so here I'm going to type in E, C, okay, and then now we got quarter notes. I'm going to hit W to move back to the quarter notes and hit G a couple times. Okay. All right, so let's input a couple more. Okay, so it seems to be working on something called proximity mode. So every time I hit a letter on the keyboard, it looks for the closest letter that's next to what you just put in. So if I hit another G here, it's going to put in the same G, but I want the one that's an octave higher. So once again, I'm going to hit Control, up arrow, and that will move that note up an octave. Okay, and back and continue. And so on. So what about the left hand? What's important is that note input will input notes. And so if you type something inadvertently, then you might get a whole bunch of notes in random places. So you want to make sure you hit escape to make sure that you're out of note edit mode. I click this rest to select that, and then I go back into note edit mode to put the left hand in. So once again, I need a quarter note, it's C. And then I need a quarter rest. It's already in here, so I can cursor over if I want. But if you ever need to input a rest, you type 0 for a rest. So 0, here we have a half rest, so you want to make sure you hit the half note icon before you hit 0. Okay. Now, this next measure is the same thing. So instead of inputting that whole thing, I can shift and click and drag and use the usual shortcut keys like Control C for copy. Click over here and Control V for paste, and it will copy all those things in for you. So that's something that's very useful. What if you mess up? You can also always use Control Z. I find myself using that quite a bit. Control Z to undo, and then you can kind of go back. And in MuseScore, there's virtually no limits to Control Z, so you can keep undoing everything until you have nothing left. But that's something of a useful keystroke to remember for MuseScore. Okay, so I was hoping to show you a lot of examples, but it looks like we're taking a lot of time here. So anyway, let's say I want to add some articulations. I can click and select notes. I do Control plus click. This way I can select very specific notes like this. And say I wanted a tenuto dash on those two notes. See it up here. And click that, and then it will automatically place the tenuto dashes on those notes. Same with slurs. Click the start note, click the last note, and then this second icon here, that's the slur. It will put a slur over those notes. Okay, it's kind of nice. You can hear the pitch as you're inputting, so you can make sure that you are inputting the correct notes and so on. Okay, dynamics. So in the palettes along the left-hand side, and this can be moved to another part of the screen if you prefer to have it somewhere else. It can be floating and so on. So I look for dynamics, I open this up, and I want to make sure I'm putting it where I want it. So I'm going to put it here, and I click Forte. Okay, and there it is. So that's kind of nice. The slurs, by the way, have handles. So if you want to do something really strange, you click on the slur, see all these little handle boxes, and you can kind of make it curvy like that. Click on the end to move that up and down, and so on. So if you ever need to kind of toy around with a slur and reshape it, it is possible to do that. Now, those are all the handles that you can get at this point. So if you want something even more complicated, like multiple curves and so on, it's just not possible to do that in MuseScore just yet. Okay. All right, so crescendo hairpins. Do it the same way. You can select a set of notes, and then it will put a hairpin between those notes. And if you ever change your mind, you can always kind of click and drag the hairpins. Now, what's kind of nice is if you have music continuing on to the next staff, and the crescendo continues through that, you don't have to create two separate crescendo hairpins. It will automatically do it correctly by making sure that the beginning of the second line, the hairpin is broken, like you see here. So that's another thing we can do. Okay, now we do have a playback, so let's see here what this sounds like. Okay, so if you want to listen to what you have written, you can always come back and try that out. Now, I do have a question about extracting parts and so on. So let me, we're going to get to that in a moment, but one other thing that we need to learn to do is to learn how to do multiple voices, because not all piano music is just one note in the right hand and one note in the left hand. It's a little different from inputting chords. So if you need to input a chord, let's say I want a C chord in the left hand, You don't want, sorry, Clementi. What I do is once I put the C in note input, um, let's say I want to add an E, I shift E, use the shift key, and then that will add on to the chord or the note that you just put in. So if I want a G in addition, shift G, that will put in a chord like that. Okay, but sometimes you need two different rhythms within one hand, so that's where the voices come in. And notice here you have a one next to a note, and that's basically telling you that what you're putting in is the first voice. So you have options to add a second, a third, and even a fourth voice to what you're doing. So let me take you back to this. There we go. Okay, so this is an example from Bach's English Suite. Okay, so you can see right away in the right hand, you have two separate voices, one with stems going up, one with stems going down. You also have rests. And even in the left hand, even though this is a very homophonic texture, Bach had decided to write each note in its own voice. So can you separate this? Now, to save time, what I've done is I've already done some input. So let's see if I can find it. Okay, it keeps reminding me to do that. Okay, so can everybody see the prelude? All right, so basically what you do is the first thing you do is to input the first voice. So let's say I left this measure out so I can demonstrate what to do here. I'm going to click on this rest and same procedure. So I'm going to click on the note input icon, and now I can put the notes in. Now it's set to quarter notes. I want 16th notes for the upper voice. So I'm going to click on 16th. Then I'm going to put in the notes for the upper voice. So they are D, C, D, E natural. So to get that, it's assuming that I want notes in the key signature. So I need to click the up arrow to get to E natural. Okay, same thing with the F sharp coming up. So it'll put it in F. And then I need to click or type the up arrow to make it F sharp. Okay, and then back to D. Okay, now you might notice, wait a minute, the stems are down, but I want that to go up. And so this is where the second voice comes in. MuseScore will automatically do that for you. So I go back and click on the first note. And this is very important. You gotta make sure that you're in note input. So make sure that the first icon is highlighted. And then you click on 2 for the second voice. Okay, now notice the color turned green. My first note with the stem down is a D, which is an 8th note. So I type that and notice all the 16th stem have gone upwards, and then we have a couple A's. All right, so we'll check that. Okay, so that's correct. And a couple things happen. So if you look at the left hand in this measure, that's a mess because in the original music, um, take a look at this measure, these two measures. Notice how the inner voice, the middle voice, it's all 8th notes, but it's shifted to the right a little bit to stay out of the way from the other beam. Okay, and this way it doesn't look like a 16th note. There's also this one note that's kind of hanging around by itself. Okay, and then even the last chord, which is all quarter notes, Bach had written these as 4 separate voices. So we want to make sure we can displace all these notes to make that clear. So let's take you back to the English suite. Okay, so it's actually pretty easy to shift the, trying to get my mouse back, shift the beam. So basically what you do is you click on the beam, and I click on the properties button here, okay, and then appearance. And there's an offset, and notice the arrows going horizontally. So this is going to move the beams right or left. If I click the up arrow key, notice how it shifted everything to the right by like a half spacing step. Okay, now that's all great and cool, but now I have this 8 note that needs to be shifted over. It's the same thing. So I don't want to hit the arrow key because that's kind of intuitive, but that would take me to a different note or something else. So I want to make sure I go through properties, appearance, and offset. And click it once. Now it's lining up with the inner beam, which I don't want. I need to offset it again, and now it's in the proper place. Okay, now I notice the stem is going all the way up to that beam. So in order to fix that, I want that stem to be a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to click this handle, and there you have it. Okay, so let's take a look at this quarter note chord. Will the accidental stay in place when I offset? And the answer is yes. So again, appearance, offset, and then you see how the accidental stays, but the note head itself and the stem moves to the right. Okay, and I want to move that over as well. Okay, so this is basically the how you would do the multi-voice thing. I was kind of wondering what it would do if you had dotted rhythms like this. Like, would it place the dots correctly? And I do that. It moves all 3 dots at the top over correctly. But notice that the bottom dot doesn't move. I want this lined up with the rest of the dots. And it took me a while to figure out, but it is possible to move the dot itself. So what you do is you click on the dot, right click, edit element, and then you can use the arrow key to move it over. So that's kind of a weird thing. I would have thought that it would be something to adjust in the properties area, but that's not the case. So that is the dotted rhythm there. All right. Let's talk about inputting something that's not piano music. Okay, so here's a piece by yours truly. I'm not trying to be pretentious, but I don't want to get into copyright issues with using somebody else's work. So this is a piano trio that's written for sax, alto sax, cello, and piano. Okay, so in MuseScore, to show you how to set that up. All right, so okay, so we're back to the new score dialog. So I want alto sax. So alto sax is under woodwinds, which is already open. So you can see here we have alto saxophone. If you can't find your instrument, then you can always put it in search and see if it comes up with it. Sometimes it doesn't show you all the options that are available. So alto saxophone, I double click that, it's in this list. Next we need cello, so strings, bowed. No, they call it violoncello, so that's the formal name for cello. And finally, keyboards for piano, double click that. Now I have these. Notice this is chamber music. I want the piano to be at the bottom. So there's a couple things you can do, but probably the easiest thing is to click on piano, and then notice these arrows show up on the right-hand side. If I click the down arrow, it'll move the piano down in the list, and this way it's ordered correctly. Okay, now you got some funny time signatures going. First of all, there's no key signature. Okay, the first time signature is 1116. So try to put in 1116, and I noticed there's not even a 16th note in this dropdown. Oh, there is. Oh, I didn't see that before. Okay, so I can do that. If you can't find it, you can always go back and fix it later. All right. Oh, tempo. Okay, I need to put in a word tempo, so I'm not going to deal with this. So I'm going to go ahead and click done. It will set up the score for me. Now, a couple things here. First of all, I want the saxophone and the cello to be smaller. Okay, I don't want them the same size as the piano, so I have to click on the staff and part properties. And then here under staff properties scale 100%, set it to something like 80 and hit OK. And you'll notice it'll change that size for the whole score. Okay, so I do the same thing for the cello. Staff and part properties, scale it down to 80%. Okay, I don't want a key signature, but this is one of the things about this. I don't know about you guys, but when I compose for other instruments that are not C instruments, I still think in C, so it's easier for me to deal with C score. So down here we have something called concert pitch. I can click on that, and it will show you the score in C score. Okay. Now you might be wondering, if I extract a part, would it show me a C score for the part? And the answer is no. Initially, it should show you the correct key. But it's something you might want to double check to make sure that concert pitch is not checked when you're trying to extract parts. Okay, I don't want a key signature. The problem is if I get rid of the key signature, I click on it and I hit delete. If I hit concert pitch, it'll add 3 flats. So like, okay, what do I do now? So under the palettes, under key signatures, there's this one with the X. It says open atonal. So if I do this, then it'll assume you don't need a key signature. And so even if you click back and forth between concert pitch and non-concert pitch, it will not bother adding the key signature into this. So for my music, that's what I need. Now, once again, to save time, I've already done a lot of the engraving here. Let me switch to that example. Okay, so I still need to put in the right hand of the piano, the cello, and the saxophone. And it looks like I didn't set up the size correctly, but now here, this is all beamed together, but often when you have an odd time signature like 1116, it's often subdivided into like certain groups. So in this case, it's 4 plus 4 plus 3. So I want to break this beam, and you do that by clicking on the note before you want the beam break. And then under the properties tab, I click on beam. And you'll notice there's this beam where there's no beam to the left of it. So it says break beam left. If I click on that, it will separate that beam. Okay. Likewise, if you want that beam together and MuseScore didn't do that, then you can join beams and then you can have that again. Okay, so I want another break here. Boom. All done. I also want all these notes staccato. So you can hold shift down while clicking and dragging, select all these notes, and then up here we have the staccato button, And there's also a shortcut you can use, but if I click that, it will make all of the notes staccato. Okay, now at this point, I want to copy that into the right hand, so I'm going to hit Control C for copy. I'm going to click this and paste. Boom. All right, and then for the cello, I want the same notes, so Control V for paste. It's already copied onto the clipboard, so all I have to do is paste that in. Okay, the saxophones are also in unison, but this is going to be in a different octave, so I'm going to paste, and you can see it's quite low. I'm going to Control up arrow to move it up an octave, and now it is in the correct place. Now, you might say, wait a minute, that's not a D sharp, but remember, this is not concert pitch. So if I click on this concert pitch, you will see the correct note show up, which is quite low, but that's that. By the way, MuseScore has this interesting feature where if you go too far beyond the possible range, let's say I took this cello, I took it down to a B, it'll turn red to say, hey, you can't do that on that instrument. Now, you can actually change the range in the options setting in MuseScore, but these are generally accepted. So obviously there is no B below low C here on a cello. Okay. Now, if it's really high and it's difficult to play, but it's still possible, you'll see olive green, meaning that it's not really meant for non-professionals. So this way you can kind of see what your range is and that kind of thing. So that's very useful. Okay, now I need to bring the piano left hand down an octave. So what I'm going to do is select that, palettes, and it's under lines. It's also under something else, but you can see here we have 8. And when I hover my mouse over, it says alta, ottava alta, which means above. We don't want that. We want the one below. So ottava bassa. And I want it to go all the way to this note. I control click on that note, and then I hit ottava bassa, and it will automatically add that for you. Okay, so in these measures over here, I just have one note to put in. So it's a half note G natural. So I go to note input, half note, and then I type G. Sorry, up there. Now, I said G natural. That's because I just had a G sharp in the previous measure. So I want to add a courtesy accidental. So I can do that by going under accidentals and clicking on the natural sign. Okay, and that will add natural. I also want that note tied to an 8th note. So I'm going to select the 8th note, and then I'm going to hit the T for tie, and it will automatically assume that I want that note tied to the next one. So that's, once again, another useful feature that could come in handy. So I want an accent on that note. I hit the accent, select, and copy it over to my alto saxophone. Should be an octave higher. Okay, now go back and play, just make sure. Okay, anyway, so that's kind of how that starts. All right, so it's already 12 o'clock. So I just want to show you one more thing before I let you guys go, which is you might have a song and you have to put in a lyric. So show you a very quick example. All right, so adding a lyric is pretty straightforward. So here I have a very short example. I'm going to blow this up a little bit so it's easier to see. I click on the note where I want the lyric to start, and then you can either go add text, lyrics, or you can see there's a Control L shortcut, so you can use that as well. And it'll show you the first text, I put in the, I hit the space, it will take me to the next note. First verse is right here. Okay, if I hit enter, it'll take me to the next line. However, it doesn't take me all the way back. Let's say my next verse doesn't start on the pickup, so I can just start right on the half note C here. I'm going to type next, but then I want this next to go over the C into the D, and then my next word will go on the E. So normally you'd put in underscore, and so all you have to do is just type an underscore, and then it will assume that's where you want it. Now here, it's highlighted under that note. I want that to be an underscore, so I hit another underscore, and then you can see this underscore just shows up nicely. So is verse 2, and finally verse 3. I'm going to show you an example where you might need a hyphen to take apart a syllable. So I hit a hyphen and adds one in, so it's pretty easy to do. Worthy of a Grammy? I don't know. You go figure it out. One limitation I found out is if I hit like 1 for first verse, it should automatically line that up. So this is 3, and yeah, all the numbers should line up, but I couldn't do that for the second verse, which starts on a different note. So if I do that, 2 is all the way over here. If I try to go backwards, yeah, I don't think it's possible. So you might have to just eyeball that. Put a space in, it doesn't do anything. A little limitation there. All right, so there's tons more I wanted to show you, but it's probably for another advanced MuseScore kind of thing. So that is it. So okay, so at this point, I'll take any questions you might have.
Wow, terrific. Terrific.
Oh, Elaine, I know you mentioned something about layout or something. Is that, it was a while ago, but let me see if I can go back to that funny musette and show you.
That was terrific.
Thank you. Okay, so the silly musette, if I scroll all the way out, you can see it's on mostly one page, but you got these 2 measures that kind of stick out into the second page. It's like, okay, well, I don't want that. So a couple of things you can do is when you go to the end of a line, say that note, and then you hit the enter key, it will put a line break in there. So maybe you want to spread out your music. So do the same thing over here, same thing over here. And then hopefully you'll have more music on that second page. So that's one of the things you can do. If you don't like the line break, you can select it and click enter again. But you can also, I believe, select the whole thing. And under appearance, there's something called measure width. So if you widen the measures, you can kind of spread it out over a longer span. Or you can go the other way, 0.5, so that kind of mushes things together a little more. But this way you can try to force something into one page rather than 2 pages and so on. So.
I had a question about.
Yeah, so MuseScore. Go ahead.
I had a question about.
Go ahead, Betty.
You said at one point that for instrumentation it was piano, so you couldn't print out instrumentation because it was only piano. So what do you do when you have 2 pianos? How do you print out 2 pianos?
Okay, well, let's see. Are you talking about four-hand music or
Yes, I am.
like two pianos, literally?
2 pianos.
Oh, so not four-hand.
No, I'm sorry.
Like 4 hands, but 2
That's
pianos.
right.
Okay. Okay, so let me see. I haven't tried that. try to create a new score
Piano
in
1 and
MuseScore.
piano 1 and piano 2.
Right.
That's right, but he said earlier, since it was piano, he couldn't print out parts because it was all piano. So I wonder what we do when we have two pianos.
Okay, so let me see here. Let me pull that up. Okay, so this is piano, and I think you can add a second piano. Like that. Okay, so I think, let me just put in some random notes here. It's going to be marvelous. Okay, so I forgot to mention, because I wanted to talk about parts, and I totally forgot because it's under time pressure. Up here it says parts, so if you click on that, then it will separate the two parts. So, for example, piano 1, open selected, and then that is your first piano part. So you can do that for each part like that, or you can just keep it together on a single single system like this. Now, if you have a forehand music where you got the primo on the recto side, the right side, and verso side for the secondo, I'm not sure how that would work in music, or I haven't tried it. I would imagine people would do this because it's pretty common to do. So if you have any questions about MuseScore, about what you're trying to do, a simple way to get answers, because so many people use this and there's a big community of people, you go to Google, type in MuseScore, and then whatever your question is, and it's likely to have been answered already. So it's actually a pretty quick way to get answers in case you run into problems. But yeah, you can separate parts, so that's not a problem. Going back to my piano trio, if I go back to my piano trio, let me show you how those parts look. So I didn't save the work, but so hit parts, and you can open all if you like. So now up here you see these tabs for each part. So there's an alto saxophone part, there's a cello part, and even a piano part. You probably don't want that for a piano trio, but if you have an orchestra piece in which there's a piano part, you might need something like this. Okay, so yes, you can separate the piano part from the rest of it.
And it prints easily, Junichi?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So go under Publish, and you can see what it's going to look like. And you can export it to a PDF file, which I use all the time. You can do a PNG image or SVG, all these audio formats. So it's kind of great for realizing what you're playing. So I plan, do I want to use MuseScore for everything? Probably not, especially the sophisticated scores. But if I need to produce a demo of my piece, using MIDI, these are great options. It's all fairly automated, and you can even do Braille if you're producing music for blind people. But under File, hang on, go back to Score here. Yeah, so you should be able to print the usual way. I had my default printer set up to Microsoft Print to PDF, but you can select any physical printer and do it the same way. Yeah, it prints beautifully. So it's very high functioning. It's got a lot of stuff, and of course, it's constantly improving because people are constantly asking for new features.
Okay.
Terrific. That was terrific.
Thank you, Junichi.
You're welcome.
I have to be honest, I've never written anything digitally, but you explained it so well. Thank you so much for explaining and exploring how to use it. I think with that, and good that we recorded it. It's very easy to use. It's quite fascinating that something like this is open for free and that we can do so many things. So we really appreciate that you put a tutorial for us. I think there are still questions.
How do you
Elena.
compare it with Sibelius? Have you
I
tried
don't use Sibelius,
Sibelius?
so I don't know. I don't
I
know.
used to have Sibelius, which I loved, but I couldn't figure out MuseScore when I tried it, but I'm going to give it another try.
Yeah, please do.
Well,
Al-
I can definitely compare with Sibelius since I'm using Sibelius all the time, and I see a lot of similarities. And the only thing that is very annoying is that you are putting notes by keyboard, where usually I would put the notes just playing on an electronic keyboard, which
yeah,
is
you can do
fast.
MIDI input, so that
You
is a
can do the
possibility.
MIDI here,
You can do
okay.
it. Mhm.
And so also what it's good in this and now with all their music score is that they do have a learn section where they provide you with their little films how to do it from their beginning. So I would advise everybody to explore that. But if people would be interested, I'm willing to do the lecture about Sibelius in the future.
Okay. I think I also have a question.
Yes, thank you. I'll be real quick. I really enjoyed it, and I see similarities to the finality softwares, which is what I use. My question is more on the legal side. I've been asked to do 3 scores, which I've already finished and sent now, for Norwegian choirs for a tour that's coming up in March. What we do every year is send the notes to them, soprano, alto, and tenor part mainly, and then we have 1 hour to rehearse after they've been rehearsing for 3 months on the part. But my question is, composer, copyright, information, should I get paid or should it be called a donation, or how do you handle any legalistics on that? Because all I'm doing is picking the song, which is not too hard to do for Black music, off of the recording.
Yeah, that sounds more not so much a music notation question, but more of a copyright law issue.
Yeah.
So if you're in doubt, you should look up who owns the copyright and try to get permission from them to use the music.
I see.
So
Okay,
that's kind
thank
of a
you.
law thing, which I'm. I don't want to give you the wrong information. So
No problem. Thank you.
I know people on the MuseScore forum, they publish stuff that probably shouldn't be there. They rearrange stuff, and then who knows if they actually got permission to use these music. So you would like to hear the silly musette, Julie?
I just don't want to go to jail, I
Yeah,
just want
right,
to do the right
exactly.
thing.
Okay, so let me pull up that silly musette, and the first part, I was doing this because my daughter is learning this piece right now, and I just kind of challenged myself to see how quickly I can input the music.
How long did it take you?
About 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
But the middle section is just total random notes. So here it is. So it'll do the repeat and everything, so that's great. And so, okay, by the way, there's a feature on here where when you want to input notes and you hit P for piano, it'll show your keyboard. And this way you can kind of input notes by clicking on the keyboard. I don't find it the most comfortable to do, so I usually stay away from that. But just so you know, that's another way to input music.
I think that was a wonderful closer for a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Junichi, for doing this. And we will see you all back in February for our next presentation.